We left off with Jesus crying out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And so we're going to skip down in chapter 27 to verse 50. And then it says, Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Details are given in the other accounts, a little more about what it was actually happening, what was said at that time. In verse 51, and behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom. It's interesting to say they give it had to be a supernatural. It was torn from like top, the heaven down to earth. It was torn from top to bottom. The veil was a very thick piece of material. And when Jesus actually died, gave up his spirit, it says that veil was ripped, which gave, basically, that was the veil that was keeping access of the people from getting into the holy place. And here, when that veil was torn, what it did is it removed the barrier. And when Jesus' death opened the barrier that had kept us from the presence of God, from being able to access his presence. And so we see that the veil was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. And here's one of the strangest verses in all of the scriptures. Only place it's talked about this, doesn't talk about it in the other gospels. And the tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. That's all it says. I mean, it says, at his death, and then it says at coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they were walking around the holy city and appeared to many. So here's people that have died, and all of a sudden they're up walking around. I mean, this is bizarre. And there's not any explanation in the scriptures about it other than just Matthew just throws it in here. What do we do with that? Well, I don't know. And then we get verse 54. Now the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, truly, this was the Son of God. They're realizing, hey, this is something pretty spectacular. This is not just any regular occurrence. A lot of people were crucified. A lot of people died by crucifixion. And so it's not so much simply the crucifixion that's the important thing. It's who was crucified, why, what did he represent. Our faith is not just that he was crucified. A lot of people were crucified. Our faith is that his crucifixion meant something. And what his crucifixion meant is that he was that sacrifice lamb that was given for our sins. His blood is upon us, but now for good and not for evil. His blood is upon us because he paid the price. We let him pay the price. We made him pay the price. We crucified him in order that he might pay the price for us. And so it's here that even the ones keeping guard say, truly, this was the Son of God. There was something so miraculous about it. So we move on from there. We go to verse 57. And when it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. So a man named Joseph of the area of Arimathea comes, and he went to Pilate to ask for Jesus' body, and it says Pilate ordered it to be given to him. Well, it's interesting here in Isaiah 53, the passage about the death of Jesus that's prophesied so much. It says in verse 9, his grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death. It's something that even in there seems to be this prophecy that a rich man would have something to do with Jesus' death. And here Joseph of Arimathea, a very rich man, comes to take his body to bury it. Verse 62, skipping along here a little bit. Now on the next day, which is the one after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I am to rise again. Therefore give orders for the grave to be made secure. Okay? Biggest, most powerful army in all the world is going to make this grave secure until the third day, lest the disciples come and steal him away and spy and say to the people, he has risen from the dead, and the last deception will be worse than the first. And so they asked, let's make it secure, have soldiers guarding his grave so that the disciples don't come steal him away, make up this story that he's risen from the dead, because he said he's going to rise on the third day, and they all knew that, and that's all coming to mind at this point. So Pilate says, yeah, go make it secure, and they made it secure. So we get to chapter 28, and this is the last chapter of Matthew, and It starts out with, now after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first of the day of the week. And here, this is real important to give the timing here, because Jesus is that sacrifice lamb. He's fulfilling the picture of redemption from the Old Testament. And the picture at Passover was there was a Passover lamb that died on a certain day, sacrificed for the sins and the bloodshed. Then at the first day of the week, the day after the Sabbath, it said they would wave a sheaf of first fruits to be accepted before the Lord. And that sheaf of first fruits was a picture of one sheaf, an early sheaf, giving a picture that there would be a harvest 50 days later. And so what happened is the waving of the sheaf of first fruit was one to be accepted before the Lord, and a picture of a harvest that was coming. Here's one that's resurrected early, or harvested early. And so what happens here is we see that Jesus fulfilled that in that on that first day of the week, he rose from the dead. He was the first one. He was the early sheaf. We see references further in the New Testament where he was called Christ the first fruits, and that because that was the sheaf of first fruits. And he fulfills that in that he was the first one to be raised from the dead, and he's accepted before the Lord. And that it's waved so we can be accepted before the Lord. But so they go to the tomb, they come to the grave. Verse 2, and behold, a severe earthquake had occurred, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. Anyway, what a cool angel. And his appearance was like lightning, and his garment as white as snow, and the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men. And the angel appeared and said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who has been crucified. He is not here, he is risen, just as he said. Come see the place where he was lying. And go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and behold, he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. Remember, Jesus said earlier on, it says, I'm going to be crucified, but then I'm going to be raised from the dead. I'm going to go to Galilee. And here, he already had that mapped out, and here he's the angel's telling the women, hey, he's going to meet you in Galilee. And then in verse 9, it says, and behold, Jesus met the women, and greeted them. And they came up and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, do not be afraid, and go and take word to my brethren to leave for Galilee, and there they shall see me. So there's this reunion going to happen in Galilee. Galilee is kind of like the wrong side of the street. It's the other side. It's not where all the chief priests and leaders would be, but it's where Jesus ministered a lot, and where so many people received him and received the miracles that he prayed with them over. So we've got that the angel appears. Jesus then tells them the same thing. I'm going to meet you in Galilee. And so we get to the great cover-up here. In verse 11, it says, now while they were on their way, behold, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests all that had happened. And when they had assembled with the elders and counseled together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, you are to say his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. They were ordered to go there and secure the place to make sure it was secure. And they were the strongest army, most powerful army in the world. And they're telling them, here, take this money and go say, we fell asleep. And his disciples, a couple fishermen and a tax collector and, some guys came and they stole his body right from under us. And, verse 14, if this should come to the governor's ears, we will win him over and keep you out of trouble. And they took the money and did as they had been instructed. And this story was widely spread among the Jews and is to this day. So the story kept going on about Jesus' body was stolen. And then we end this whole thing with the Great Commission, which a lot has been said about that. In the last verses 16 and on, Jesus met with the 11 disciples, it says in verse 16. They saw him, they worshipped. It says, but some were doubtful in verse 17. And you can see that. Here, they saw him crucified. They knew he was crucified, and they knew he was in the grave. They were all in panic, and now he's alive. And so they worshiped, but they were kind of like, I don't know. And then Jesus gives what's called the Great Commission, that we call the Great Commission. And he said in verse 18, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe, and the word observe there doesn't mean to look at, it means to do, all that I commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. So here's the final things that Jesus is giving in the book of Matthew. What Matthew records is the last real statement that he made of impact, and it was, now I've been given all authority. Go in my name. So that means you've got the authority, and make disciples of the nations, baptizing them and teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And he gives this assurance, I'm going to be with you even to the end of the age. And we'll see how that is when we get to the book of Acts much later.